guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, as you can see behind me, we have the Mark 8 Fiesta from AET Motorsport, the Voodoo Stage 1 250-260 brake horsepower. But this side, Haven't Car Company have supplied me a 250-260 brake horsepower Stage 2 Mark 7. Now we're going to pitch these cars together to see what a modified Mark 7 with the same sort of power is like compared to a modified Stage 1 Mark 8 Fiesta. Something I wanted to do for a while having the AET Motorsport Fiesta is actually pitch it against a Mark 7 with the same sort of power. So we're going to find out today what these cars are actually like on the road. We're going to talk about pricing, we're going to talk about mods, we're talking about everything. But I must say firstly, thank you so much to AET Motorsport for supplying the Mark 8 Fiesta and Haven't Car Company for supplying the Mark 7. Now one of the first things I want to talk about is styling, especially with this Mark 7. I think it's some of the best styling mods you can actually put on one of these Mark 7s, with the eyelids and the extensions on the front bumper. Gives it a lot more shape. Unfortunately, the Mark 8 doesn't have as much shape at the front end. It's a lot bigger. The headlights especially are a lot bigger than the Mark 7. And although this is a completely standard front end on this Mark 8, it doesn't have as much shape and straight line as the Mark 7. It's a little bit more bubbly. Now that obviously continues around the car. There's a lot more bubble to the actual Mark 8 look than there is to the Mark 7. It's a little bit straighter. And I think you guys would agree with me that the look of the Mark 8 compared to the Mark 7, I sort of prefer the Mark 7 a lot more because of the straight lines rather than the bubbles. I think from the factory this looks like a better car, but this one today looks better in this sort of spec with the mods. Now the interior of the Mark 7, I think personally is a nicer place to be. The seats are a lot more comfortable, although the bolsters are a little bit tighter, so if you're a little bit of a bigger lad like me, you will feel that these are a little bit tighter, but comfier. I think the Mark 8 aren't as conformed to your frame like these are. They've just got a lot more bolster support. Inside though, we have pretty basic steering wheel with the ST logo in. I do like the dials, and the center screen on here is a lot better than the Mark 8. And don't get me wrong, this isn't me mocking the Mark 8 and the styling of it. I just think I prefer the shape of the dash, the gloss black center and the dials of the Mark 7. Whereas the Mark 8 interior is actually a lot larger. You feel like you're in a bigger, comfier car in the Mark 8. I prefer the steering wheel in the Mark 8, but the center screen, again, like I pointed out in the actual review of this car, can't get on with the size of the screen, it's just like there. But the dials, the actual dial interface on the Mark 8, because of the center screen and the fact you can change it and all that sort of stuff, it is a very different car though, because you feel it's a lot bigger in here. You've got a lot more space to party and relax, whereas the Mark 7 has a little bit more of a stricter seating arrangement, so it makes you feel like there's less space in the cabin. But that's enough of me talking about what I do and don't like about each car. We're going to get firstly the Mark 7 on the road, see what this is like, see what it's like with the 250-260 brake horsepower, and then jump in the Mark 8. So the Mark 7, the one I have today, one thing to point out, doesn't have a pop and bang mode. It doesn't have it. It was not mapped in when the guys at AET Motorsport actually sent down the remap for this car. So, something to point out, not all Fiestas have a pop and bang mode, but it means that you get the more surgy, exciting burble from this rear end. Because it has the Miltech, it sounds like a jet fighter taking off this thing. So 250, 260 brake horsepower, this one. Pretty much stage 2 in the Fiesta world. And I think the first things to point out is that the difference between the Mark 7 and the Mark 8 is the fact that you can get more power out of the littler 1.5 litre 3-cylinder engine that you get in the Mark 8. It's just development with new cars and stuff, so you're getting the same amount of power in a stage 1 that you would get in a stage 2 Mark 7. Now this one, stages aside, means that this propels itself fantastically. I think 250 brake horsepower to 260 is the perfect amount in the Mark 7 chassis, because it means, although it surges round, and when the boost does come on, this one kicks in at around 3,500 to 4,000 RPM, revs right round to the magical 6.5 to 7,000 RPM red line. It means that this Perron, which is what it is, stage 2 everything, actually performs and surges. The torque is really deep down in the rev, and you don't have to work for the power, which is quite nice. It's actually incredibly enjoyable. There isn't as much torque in the Mark 7 that I'm driving today as there is in the Mark 8. Even with that smaller engine, there is still mountains more torque, and you can actually feel it. So we're second gear now. Got a little bit of light up from the front end, but it hasn't got as much surge, even with the same sort of brake horsepower figure. It does do an incredibly good job at B-road bashing this car. I do think though, the Mark 7, the one especially that I'm in today, it feels a little bit smaller, it feels more upright, it feels like the chassis is as stiff as the Mark 8 is, because this is actually on HSD coilovers. The turn-in is incredible, although this one is sat on aftermarket wheels, they're a little bit wider. I do get this sensation from the Mark 7 especially. It's a little bit cheekier, is what the Mark 7 is. And the Mark 7 owners out there will know what I'm talking about. It's a little bit more freer with its rear end. It's a little bit more freer with the steering. It's not as direct, I would say, as the Mark 8 is. But that is obviously because it's a newer car. It feels a little bit tighter. Not saying that this one feels loose, because it doesn't. At 51,000 miles, it still feels very secure on the road as well. At £9,500, which is what this car is up for, it's an absolute bargain, this thing. I think it's got all of the power you could want in a Mark 7. It doesn't light the front up too much for you to be, you know, spinning off into a hedge constantly. I think the rear end especially is better in the Mark 8. It pitches a little bit nicer. Although this one's on coilovers and the Mark 8 is actually on springs, I think the Mark 8 corners a little bit better, because the chassis is obviously a little bit more set up from the factory than the Mark 7 was. But I must admit, this Mark 7 is fantastic. The Mark 8 is an incredibly capable car. It is a lot bigger inside. You get a sense that it's a bit better laid out. There isn't too many pointy bits on the dash, although the screen is absolutely massive and looks like it's been plonked in front of you. But there is more space. The seats are a lot wider than the Mark 7, but less comfort to drive. This car is, of course, more superior than Mark 7. It just is development to the next stage of how good these cars are when they come out of the factory. This one has a fettling of mods, lowered a little bit, spacers. It has the Torax front brakes, which are phenomenal, but obviously we can't pitch them against standard brakes because that's just not fair. Power at stage 1 is 250 to 260 brake horsepower. AT Motorsport did a fantastic job of making this car with little modifications. Unbelievable through the B-roads. Literally, if you grab this thing by the scruff of the neck and want to throw it round, it goes on 3 wheels, so the rear wheel actually cocks a leg, just like the good old days with the old school hot hatches. This car does that. It feels a lot more planted on the road. The bigger wheels and thick tyres on the Mark 8 mean that it's a lot more easier to turn in, so as you do chuck it into a corner, the front end is definitely sharper. The rear end acts in a completely different way, where it cocks the wheel, but it actually forces itself around the corner. Another talking point is that this one, especially with the performance pack on it, has the Quaife diff up front, which is miles more impressive than the Mark 7's base diff that comes from the factory. Obviously a factory opted Quaife diff means that it's able to force itself and its power to the ground a lot better than the Mark 7, and then when you do chuck it into a corner, it actually performs in such a completely different way to the Mark 7. Pitching these two cars together is hard, because as I've had this for a few weeks now, nearly a month, I've really come to terms with how it drives, and it drives fantastic. Yes, it's not as comfy as the Mark 7. In sport mode, it is a little bit choppy, on the suspension. And even today, versus the HSD coilovers that are on that Mark 7, that Mark 7 is still a lot more comfier than this Mark 8. The torque is more impressive in this 3-cylinder 1.5 litre that's in the Mark 8. It's developed a little bit better. So the torque as you come in, so second gear, the torque, 4,000 RPM, it's just a little bit more impressive than the Mark 7. So as a B-roader, I think the Mark 8 is a better car. But I think for everyday use, if I was to everyday drive a car, the Mark 7 would be the comfier choice. This one is fantastic. It is so poised, so quick on the steering rack is hilariously fast. This Mark 8 as a factory car that has spacers, a little bit more power, springs, and a good set of tyres on is worlds away from the Mark 7. And of course this one has pops and bangs, so if you were to ever want to pop and bang yourself away anywhere, the most impressive pop and bang actually for people that want to know is when you really come down, first gear is literally insane. That's a lot of pops and bangs. So if you're a driver and you want to kick a car's head in constantly, this is the one I would go for. So after driving both cars, which one would I personally take home now? I love the AT Motorsport Mark 8. It is a fantastic weapon for any B-road. It cocks a leg. It is incredibly enjoyable. The chassis is phenomenal on the new ST. The Mark 7 though, I think, exciting through the roads. Yes, this is a very grippy car, but this one still, because it flexes a little bit more, means that it feels a bit more like an old school car. The thing is, these are still over 15, 16, 17,000 pounds. This one, the Mark 7 that we have today, £9,500 for all of the stuff that's put on this thing. So on face value, I think the option would be the Mark 7, but which one would I take home? Which one would you take home? Leave a comment below and let me know what you would take home, but I think for me, sorry Mark 8, beautiful car, but this is the one I'm taking home.